Hello, and thanks for joining the Talking Animals Law and Philosophy series. My name is Raphael Fazal. I'm an assistant professor in public law at the University of Cambridge and the co-director of the Cambridge Centre for Animal Rights Law. We're really delighted to be here today. This is the 10-year anniversary of the Talking Animals Law and Philosophy series. I founded it 10 years ago with my friend Visa Kurki. And it's crazy to see how time flies. And we're really delighted to have a special year full of distinguished speakers for you all. So it should be really exciting. And we're particularly excited about our first speaker, about whom I'll say more in a second. But first, I want to just say a few things about how the Talking Animals series works. So we are using webinar. This means that we can actually see any of the attendees, although I can see how many of um, uh, of you there are. You are able to come in the discussion using the Q&A function. So if you scroll to the bottom of your Zoom app, you'll see the possibility to pop in questions and comments, basically. Others can upvote questions or comment on those questions. And then when we reach the Q&A bit, that will allow me to feed those questions to our speaker. So we'll start with a presentation by the speaker that will last somewhere between 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll move over to the Q&A and the discussion. We will record the presentation bit of this event, so if you want to watch it later, it should be uploaded to YouTube and our website in due course. But we'll then turn off the recording so people can feel free to ask their questions and make their comments. Okay, I think that's all as far as the format of the event is concerned, and it is now my great pleasure to introduce our fantastic speaker today, and that's of course Marc Bekoff, who is Professor Emeritus of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Marc has published more than 30 books, of which have been translated, many into over 21 languages. He's won numerous awards for his research on animal behavior, animal emotions, compassionate conservation, and animal protection, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, the St. Francis of Assisi Award, and an Exemplar Award from the Animal Behavior Society for long-term contributions to the field. He's worked very closely with Jane Goodall, who's very sadly passed away recently, as the co-chair of the ethics committee of the Jane Goodall Institute. His books include Wild Justice, The Moral Lives of Animals, Minding Animals, Awareness, Emotions, and Heart, The Animal's Agenda, Freedom, Compassion, and Coexistence in the Human Age, Canine Confidential, Why Dogs Do What They Do, and Jane Goodall at 90, celebrating an astonishing lifetime of science, advocacy, humanitarianism, hope, and peace. And we're really thrilled that Marc can join us today to talk about celebrating the emotional lives of animals and why they matter. Thank you very much, Marc, for being here, and over to you.
Okay, well, hello everyone. It's kind of weird. I have no idea who's out there or how many of you. So I was telling Raphael before that I don't really have a lot to say. I'll just keep talking, and I don't know if it's okay for people to pop questions in as I'm talking. I mean, I've got the little Q&A thing open, so I am hoping you'll all totally agree with me. And a lot of, I should say, Jane Goodall was a very close friend and colleague of mine, and I really miss her, of course. But a lot of the thinking along some issues was really motivated and developed by working with Jane. I'm not saying she would necessarily agree with everything, and I don't mean that in any, funny or other way, but she really pushed me very hard as a scientist and friend and colleague. And at one point, I was the ethics committee for the Jane Goodall Institute. Now I co-chair it with a man named Koen Margot, who's in Belgium. So the title, and I don't know if you all saw it, that I put out was Animal Sentience and Compassionate Conservation Taking Killing Off the Table. So I'm never sure where to go on this, but just some introductory comments, but please feel free to send in questions. So the first topic that I could consider, but it really blends in, they blend together compassionate conservation and animal sentience, would be compassionate conservation. And compassionate conservation is a rapidly growing field. The first formal meeting that brought in people from all over the world was held at Oxford in the UK in late August, early September, and generated a lot of interest. It brought together people from different fields. And in some ways, the focus of compassionate conservation on the basic tenets were first do no harm and the life of every individual matters. And I helped to develop that, and it's developed a lot over the last 15 years, which is a scary thought that it was 15 years ago. But some of the basics of compassionate conservation would be that the life of every individual matters, sentient or not. But a lot of the people who were very interested early on used the notion of sentience as one of the key motivators for developing the field of compassionate conservation. So I'll say a bit about compassionate conservation, and I can actually use an example that's happening literally today, and I mean today on the ground here in Colorado with the reintroduction of wolves who were killed off by humans about 90 years ago. So I hope that works for you all. So, like I said, compassionate conservation developed because a lot of people, including myself, were really just tired of traditional conservation being basically a killing machine, where it was you were allowed to kill off animals of the same species to save members of that species or kill other animals to save members of yet another species. And killing just doesn't work. I mean, there's people who sometimes say, well, yeah, it works. Look at this example, look at that example. But in the long run, it doesn't work. And I believe that it's ethically indefensible. And along those lines, about 2 weeks ago, I was told about a paper that was published called Ethical Arguments That Support Intentional Animal Killing. And it was in, I can't remember the journal, Frontiers in Ecology or something like that. And I honestly couldn't get through the paper after reading the abstract because whether it was intended or not, the offshoot of that paper was that it was an invitation for killing when it's really not necessary. And I had a lot of people write to me asking what I thought about the paper. And like I said, I really couldn't, I didn't read a lot of it. I'm not a philosopher. And but there were some criticisms of it from the philosophical point of view. So I just kind of read it and thought, my attitude, and I'm a field biologist, so I'm not only coming to this from former member of the ivory tower, but just coming to it that I don't see much success in killing. And I'm risking some philosophical jargon here, but I have worked with some really good philosophers like Dale Jamieson and others on animal ethics and questions about the way we treat animals. So I like to start that intentionally killing animals is wrong. And I think that a lot of people who write about it use the word euthanasia. They'll say, oh, we euthanize these animals to save other animals. But in fact, it wasn't euthanasia. When that happens in zoos, I call it zoothanasia. because euthanasia is really mercy killing. So this is the killing of otherwise healthy animals who could go on to have very rich and full lives as members of their species, who are killed because people think it's going to work to help, in this case, say members of the same species. So basically, what's been happening here on the ground, it's happening literally today. I mean, literally today in Colorado, is wolves in Colorado were killed off by humans around 90 years ago. And there haven't been many wolves here at all. Some come down, if you know the United States, from Utah or Wyoming, which are north and northwest of Colorado. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife, called CPW, along with a lot of people, decided to bring wolves back in. It became a ballot issue because the people who wanted wolves here were trying to make it non-political. And of course, that was a pipe dream because bringing wolves back into Colorado was going to turn political regardless of what the intentions were of the people who voted for it. So the ballot issue passed, narrowly passed by about 50.3 to 49.7. I think that adds up to 100. So it was a majority, but hardly what I would call, a command, if you will, to bring wolves back. But since the majority rules, wolves were brought in. So in December of 2023, 10 wolves were basically taken from their home in Oregon and brought to Colorado. I was at the first release of 5 wolves, and then the next day, 5 more wolves were released. Since then, in January of 2025, 15 wolves were captured in British Columbia and brought here. And from the people I talked to in British Columbia, they were really happy to have wolves brought down here where they might get killed, and a number have been killed because there's a killing spree in British Columbia to kill wolves. So why not let somebody else do it so you don't look so bad? And I actually had a number of people tell me that when it was decided that wolves from British Columbia would be basically kidnapped and moved to Colorado. So I wrote an essay a few years ago called The Slippery Slopes of Reintroduction or Repatriation Projects that raise a number of issues. I'm sure buried in there are legal issues as well, because there's still a haggle about what they call here the 10J rule about protecting wolves. Are they an experimental population? Or what are you going to call them? I mean, I think reintroduction programs are experiments because you have no idea whether they're really going to work. So what's happened here in Colorado since the wolves have been released? Colorado Parks and Wildlife refused in the original wolf reintroduction program to take lethal control off the table. So that means that wolves who were brought here could be killed if they behaved as wolves, i.e., they killed, I hate the word livestock, but if they killed livestock, instead of going after wild prey. So what happened, and it was just really a pleasant surprise. I mean, they don't ask me anymore about what I think because I really feel they don't want to hear the truth. And they don't go to a lot of people who have the views that we brought the wolves here, so therefore we should protect them. So what happened was a pact formed in spring of 2024, shortly after they were released in December 2023. So there was a mother and a father, and they produced 5 children. And when people ask me, did I think that was going to happen? I was hoping it would happen. Now I'm not so sure that it was good that it happened. But CPW, after some wolves were killing livestock, went in and tried to trap the pack, and they wanted to stop the killing of livestock. So wolves, like other carnivores, are prudent predators. I mean, they're going to take an easy meal just like you and I might. I mean, and why not? Life in the wild is tough. So they trapped the pack. The father was put in they used leg hold traps, which of course is yet another ethical disaster. And they put the father, in a cage where he died. We still don't have a necropsy report after a year and a half, which is a mind blower. Um, and apparently the male had been shot, so he died. They then took the mother and let me see, four of the kids and put her and the four kids into a cage, basically an enclosure. They called it an enclosure, but it was a cage in hopes of food imprinting them. The reason being, or the reasoning being that they would put these wolves in a holding cage. They would get used to eating basically, dead deer, elk, or moose, who would be their favorite meals in Colorado. And then when they were released, they would then go after them rather than livestock. It didn't work. And had CPW paid any attention to the existing science that killing off or capturing members of a wolf pack could lead to the dissolution of the group? And had they looked at the literature on food imprinting, I discovered that a number of people who did this work had no idea what food imprinting was. They would have known that it wouldn't work. So what happened was they also missed one of the pups who was on his own for a year. He went out and killed 3 sheep a couple of months ago, and then he was murdered by CPW. I mean, so they took a wolf who was a survivor. Some people would say he had really good genes. He was on his own. And they killed him because he killed sheep. I mean, that's like, having somebody just deliver dinner to your door. Okay. So the, the reason they were doing this was caving into the ranchers. Okay. I believe that all the individuals involved, and it would be once again another tenet of compassionate conservation, that everyone's a stakeholder. But I think the wolves are the major stakeholders because we brought them here. We trapped them either in Oregon and Canada. We brought them here. And I think by doing that, we were totally responsible for their well-being. I mean, they were killed and moved and trapped and put in cages because they were just behaving like wild wolves. And I always say that if you wanted animals who looked like wolves roaming the landscape so it looked good, you could have put Malamute huskies or Siberian huskies out there. But they wanted wolves. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the ranchers are stakeholders, and I feel sorry for some of them, not all of them. I mean, it turned out that the a large number of cows or sheep who were killed were just vulnerable because the ranchers didn't do anything to protect them. There were open carcass pits where they dumped dead animals in. And of course, that's a magnet for predators like wolves and cougars who also live in Colorado. And they didn't try to use non-lethal control like flashing lights, flags, etc. There's no shortage of non-lethal methods that could have been used to deter the wolves. So unfortunately, that's still happening literally today. CPW is wanting to bring back more wolves into Colorado. And my take, and I've been very open about it. I mean, I'm a field biologist. I would love to have live wild wolves here. But the more wolves you bring in, the more problems there's going to be. There's just more mouths to feed. So, right now, of the wolves who were brought in as of last January, say 10 or 11 months ago, there's apparently a few more packs with pups. So I and a few people are really fighting to keep them alive, taking lethal control off the table. Okay, so there's real issues here, and like I said, I don't read a lot of the law behind it because Because number one, I'm not a lawyer. Some of you probably know Justin Marceau at the University of Denver, who runs the animal law program there. So I work closely with Justin about a lot of these things. But once again, they're talking about the legal or the legality of bringing wolves in from Canada. We were just told that we can't bring wolves in from Canada. They have to come from other states. Um, Washington, the state of Washington just said they're not allowing any more wolves to come here. So right now, as of literally this morning, it's a real dilemma or trilemma or quadrilemma, if you will, is where are these wolves going to come from? So I've been very frank when people ask me, and I'll say, let's protect the wolves we have here right now, take killing off the table. And over time, if they're protected, I think we can get to a sustainable population. Okay. So that's one part of my presentation, and I see questions are coming in. The other part, I'll just say a few words about animal sentience. Animal sentience, the way I cash it out, is simply refers to the ability of animals to feel. Um, yeah, I mean, that's simply it. I mean, I know there's differences between sentience and emotions, but most people use the two words interchangeably. And last year, a second edition of my book called The Emotional Lives of Animals was published, which really expanded the first edition that came out about 18 years ago. I added around 300 references, and not one single reference um, said that we were doing enough for animals. Okay, for many of you who have written long papers or books, I love doing it, but sometimes it gets a little tedious. So to sort of pass the time, I just made a chart. Does the new research to these new data support not giving wolves or other animals as much protection, or does it mandate that we do? There wasn't one check that said that we couldn't do better to protect other animals. Okay. So sentience just comes in for me because it seems like every week I'm seeing, sometimes twice a week, seeing new articles that support the idea that we need to increase what I call the biodiversity of sentience. More and more animals are coming into the fold. In the UK, you've got a lot of legislation. I think that would be an okay word, protecting cephalopods, protecting other, invertebrates, saying that lobsters don't like being plopped into a pot of boiling water. Um, the field of insect sentience is really growing rapidly with some really good data. Um, so once again, whether we know I like the precautionary principle in this discussion, and that is we have enough data right now to support the idea that far more animals are sentient than we give them credit for, if you will, as if having feelings is something you should have credit for. And so I'd just like to keep the door open to say that we continually need more research in the field of animal sentience, but I'm not against invasive research. Years ago, people used to, there were some people who said animals didn't feel pain, but yet there were people who were doing horrific invasive research on animals to learn more about human pain. Sometimes they get funding because they said we're interested in whether these animals feel pain. But if they don't feel pain, why should you do research on animal pain? Okay. And I'm not advocating that we use humans necessarily for it, but I think that if you combine science and common sense, then when we don't know something today, we should keep the door open. Okay. So just summarizing, and I see questions are coming in, and I'd love to have a discussion with you about these. Um, Summarizing, um, sort of, how can I put this? Well, I don't know who's here, so I can't really say that you're part of the group, but that's okay. A lot of times, people who are interested in animal protection or animal well-being are accused of being radical. I always put radical in quotes. So, a lot of my work and that of others, and perhaps many of you who are listening today, is that we want to normalize the protection of non-human animals. We want to normalize a deep concern for their well-being, and that, we should be normalizing kindness and compassion and respect for other animals, so that the people who willy-nilly go out and kill other animals, because they think it's going to work, um, should be the ones who should be labeled radical, and the ones who should have to really protect, what really have to defend their points of view. Okay, and I gave a talk, gave a similar talk to a group on Saturday of predominantly conservationists in West Africa. And the idea of moral patience came up, and I kind of know what that is, but I wouldn't want to debate Raphael about what a moral patient is. But the whole idea came up, you know, talking about how we can change what we're doing from the get-go to not think we need to kill animals in order to protect other members of their species or members of other species. And one thing that came up at the end was the One Health initiative, which basically often cashes out that what helps them, meaning other animals, helps us. But somebody at the gathering, from Cape Town, I believe, basically argued, and I think he was right, that what's happened a lot is the One Health movement has been co-opted by a lot of people who favor humans once again. Okay. That's kind of my reading of it, but I don't like to talk about things I don't know much about. But I would like to believe that the One Health program, if it were adopted seriously, could lead to that what helps them, other animals, also helps us. And I'm just going to sort of bookend it just because of Jane Goodall's work. In the early 90s, Jane founded a group called Roots and Shoots. And it was founded in Dar es Salaam, where Jane has a home and our family still has a home there now. And it began with like 16 teenagers cleaning up the beaches around Dar es Salaam. And it's grown. So I've been an ambassador. Jane appointed me to be a sort of a roving ambassador for Roots and Shoots because I was traveling all over the world giving talks, often with Jane. So the mission of Roots and Shoots is really to help animals, people, and the environment, which cashes out as ape. I believe I pointed that out to a few people who hadn't put it together. I didn't put it together either. A young high school girl at a talk I was given said, "Well, that's really cool. It's ape." So I can't remember her name, but I'll give her credit anonymously. But I really think that a lot of what Jane did in research really looked at all the individuals as stakeholders. So when she began researching Gombe, she immediately, and this is long before Roots and Shoots was established, formed a program called TACARE, TACARE, which helped the local women. It empowered the local women so that they could get jobs and could actually get loans for the work they were doing, and the work they were doing to save the local habitat. Because I wasn't there in the beginning, but Gombe is a good example that was really heavily forested. If you've seen documentaries of Jane's work and the chimpanzees there, and now, um, and now it's just completely denuded, if you will. Okay. So I like to think that a program that could protect non-human animals, human animals, and their shared homes would be the way to go. So I'll just say that my take is that we need to develop programs that just remove killing from the list of possibilities. And people say, well, that's just not realistic. Well, we don't know if it's realistic or not, really, because no one's really tried to do it, except in a few instances. So there are some programs that show that compassionate conservation could be successful.